I'm Gail Murphy, the celebritizer in Hollywood, and you're listening to Cindy Ashton and Jason Reed.
The Speaking for Profit Podcast. This is the show for speakers, performers, and business professionals who speak. We'll discuss the craft of performing, storytelling, and how to connect to your audience so that you can increase your influence and your profits. We'll also go behind the mic with entertaining stories from the stage and the road. Joining me from New York City, theater capital of the world, I would like to introduce my co-host. She's a singer, an award-winning presentation coach, and the dynamic diva of professional speaking, Ms. Cindy Ashton.
Thank you. And joining me from Toronto as an award-winning story editor, international speaker, speak-to-sell expert, and just an all-round amazing guy, Jason Reed.
Aw, thank you, Cindy. We've got a great show coming up. We are going to talk about the importance of knowing your audience. Plus, we're tackling a really big question from our listeners about how to get lucrative bookings if you are a speaker.
And on our Behind the Mic section, Jason and I will talk about our very first speaking engagements.
Well, we always remember our first time, don't we, Cindy? And doesn't it always seem to be a disappointment looking back on it?
What first time are we talking about here, Jason?
Forget I said anything. Maybe I'll have a snappy comeback by the time we get to that section.
I hope so, because you know me, I'm just a little saucy. It's part of my brand. All right, but first things first, you have a story to tell, don't you, my darling? A story about a wasted opportunity.
Indeed. A couple of months ago, I was at a fairly large conference of solopreneurs and small business people. And on the stage was an executive from a bank who sponsored the conference. And unfortunately, I watched him blow an opportunity to get about 300 or so leads for his company. So to give you a bit of a background, as part of the bank's sponsorship, this gentleman was given a few minutes to talk about his bank. And new business accounts from solopreneurs and entrepreneurs are actually potentially fairly lucrative to banks because you never know who's going to be the next Steve Jobs, right? So this was actually, an important little message, but this executive, when he came up, he started mumbling out the most bland and irrelevant statistics about his company. It's what we used to call a boilerplate in advertising. So he talked about how many branches they had, how many billions of dollars in assets they had, how many countries they operated in.
Yawn, yawn, yawn.
Yeah. And this was of no interest to this audience of solopreneurs. It didn't speak to anything that we had a concern about. And I remember, after his first sentence, I was watching people's reaction, and everybody looked down and started working on their phones and stuff. He pretty much lost the entire crowd. But here I was thinking was, he's going on about billions of dollars in assets and all of these countries they operate out of. I started thinking, well, if this is what the bank thinks is important, then they're really not going to care too much about a small business account, are they?
Right.
That's how it sounds.
Yeah.
So, and I probably wasn't the only one who thought this way. And he could have easily won over the crowd. This was a friendly audience. The bank was sponsoring something we liked and were involved in. And it could have been such an easy thing to win us over. Now, in this executive's defense, I do know that when you're working for a big company, even at the executive level, they don't want you to go way off script. But here's the thing, you don't have to be controversial or even complicated in your messaging when you're introducing your business. You just have to think about the needs of your audience.
Yeah.
So I was thinking, even though it's not great, even if he'd said something simple like this, it would have been a lot better. Something like, it's great to be involved with a conference devoted to solopreneurs. Whether you're looking to start a new business, build an existing one, or even are interested in inquiring about a loan, we would love to talk to you about it. We've got locations all around the city, so drop into the one that's most convenient for you.
Bam.
Yeah. Now, doesn't that sound like a bank that would be more in tune with your needs, Cindy?
Yes. I'd love to be a billionaire one day, but right now I can't relate.
Exactly. So, the point of learning here is whenever you do a talk, even if it's something really short or you're just introducing your business, just think about your audience and what they want. And if you approach it from that point of view, it's really hard to go wrong.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, it's time to go behind the mic.
Ta-da!
Ta-da! So here's how it works. Jason and I have a question bank that we dip into whenever we have guests on the show. These questions are often meant to bring out personal stories about speaking or about the craft of performance. You know, we love discussions that are insightful and real and maybe a bit raw. And during some shows, like the one today, we turn these questions on ourselves. And our question for today is, tell us the story of your very first speaking engagement. You want to know about my first time, Jason?
Yes, I do, Cindy.
Well, I was only 16 years old. And I was an early riser. So I actually remember my first singing gig. And not necessarily my first speaking engagement. I actually don't remember my first speaking engagement. I guess it wasn't that exciting. But I could tell you about my first singing gig, the first time I was really on a bigger stage. And so the little backstory is that I, really wanted to always sing, dance, and act and be on stage and speak and inspire the world. And, it's funny because I actually got kicked out of choir when I was younger because apparently I couldn't sing. Yeah, so apparently I can't sing. So I ended up changing high schools in grade 11, and I had decided at that point, if I can't sing and I have a terrible singing voice, I might as well dance. And so I was trying to be a professional dancer, or at least get into a professional school. And the stage band leader came up to me, Mr. St. Cyr, and he said, Cindy, I heard that you're a great dancer. And I said, well, thank you. And he says, I've got like the stage band doing Fever, and we need somebody to sing it and who could really sell it with those hips. And I was like, I can sell it dance-wise, but I can't sing. And he says, well, let me be the judge of that. Come on out and, and sing with a band. So I went in there and, had 30 people and, with their brass instruments. And I'm like, Fever in the morning. All right. And he's like, damn, girl, you can sing. And I'm like, really? I've always been told I can't. And I got kicked out of a school or kicked out of choir and da-da-da. Anyways, so you have to understand that I'm a bit of a diva. I'm down to earth. I'm very sweet, but I'm a bit of a diva. Let's face it. So I bought this gold dress and long white gloves.
I can just picture that.
Right. It's pretty crazy. And you have to understand, this is on like VHS somewhere. This is how old I am. So here I am in this gold long dress, and you have to understand how very brave this is. I was not a popular girl in high school. I was pretty hated. I was like in the loser crowd. And so I was like the nonconformist, to the point where I think I was 17 and I had dyed my hair blue just to make a statement that I'm not like you, F you, part of my language. I was like all about, I'm going to own the fact that you all hate me. So it was very brave of me to have to get up in front of 300 people of, my peers who really didn't like me and that, bullied me and stuff. And I had to get up and sing this and sell this very sexual song. And I was actually a virgin at the time. Although somehow or another, I had the moves down. I think I was like born a sexual being. I was like a little fetus, like sporting her moves. So bump, bump, bum, ba, so the whole like bass line's going, and I like walk out and I'm like, boom, you could just imagine the hips going one at a time, the gold dress, hip and flare, hip and flare. And so I'm going along and I'm sauntering across the stage to get to the mic and, using my curly arms, like, like the kind of Middle Eastern arms and, really like very sensual. I get up to the mic and I'm like, nobody could hear me.
Oh, jeez.
So I have a 30-piece stage band, brass going, with their big trombones and trumpets. And I'm like, you can't hear me. The mic wasn't turned on, although we discovered later that I, in my sensualness, if that's a word, accidentally turned it off when I grabbed the mic. My finger slipped it down. So I was like, okay, I'm in front of a group of people that hate me. I have no sound, and I'm just going to sell this. And I totally sold it, and people were cheering because they was really crazy. And they were cheering even though they didn't hear me because I totally sold the song. Like, I totally sold it. So anyways, at the very end of the concert, they invited me back up on stage because everybody felt so bad that I didn't get to sing my big solo. And it was my first time ever singing in public. So I ended up going back and I'd worked it again and I sang it. And I got a standing ovation. And it almost brought me to tears because I never felt love. And I'm not playing this as a victim. It's just part of my childhood, and I love myself, and I'm surrounded by love now. But this is like high school was awful for me. Ontario at the time, was a 5-year system, and I graduated in 4 to get the heck out of there as fast as I could. I mean, I can't believe I survived high school. It was horrible for me.
Wow.
And so for me to have a standing ovation from my peers that always bullied me was really remarkable. And you know that I totally milked that moment. I did the whole, raise the arm up and like flutter the arm down and the big bow. I mean, it was very, 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 very big. It was very Liza Minnelli.
So is that what got you addicted to performing as soon as that applause hit your ears?
No, I was addicted to performing my earliest memory of childhood was 3 years old and wearing some blue sparkly little dress and dancing on the living room table too. So, no, I've been addicted to performing since I was a fetus. Everyone's like, when did your passion for performing start? And I'm like, it's just been in me my whole life. It's not really a choice, believe me. I can't tell you when I decided that this was my path. I've always known it, and it's not a choice. It's my given purpose. So now that you have my little fever moment, fever in the morning.
That's quite the first time.
Yes, it's quite the first time. So how old were you when you had your first time, Jason?
Yeah, well, it's interesting talking about journeys, and I don't want to go down the rabbit hole too much, but when I was younger, I wanted to be on television and television news, and the thing was, I actually looked really young for my age. It was very hard for me to get work because I looked like I was 12, and back then, if you were a man, if you looked young, they didn't have all the fancy specialty channels you got now, with all these sort of young men on the air. If you were a man, you were expected to look like you were like 30 years old and grizzled and had seen the world. So I ended up moving behind the scenes in news and, working in the writing, producing sphere, and eventually became a news director. And interestingly enough, that's when I got my first time in front of a big audience. And it's a very atypical story, but I decided to go for brutal honesty as opposed to education here. And maybe, Cindy, you can sort of help me figure out learning points from this.
Okay.
So I'm a news director. I'm basically handling news for the entire country for this network, and it's a very difficult job. And here's an interesting thing about men who do very difficult jobs and do them well. So think about doctors and lawyers who are very busy. You start to think that you can do anything. And someone comes to you with something, it's like, yeah, I'll do it. Yeah, I'll do it. Yeah, I'll do it. Yeah, you want me to fly to Los Angeles flying a Boeing 747 on my own without a pilot? Yeah, sure, I'll do that. That's just kind of the mindset, right? You don't think too much about the consequences. You just assume you can do everything.
Right.
So one day my boss comes to me, and our vice president of marketing is supposed to be speaking at the Canadian Marketing Association National Conference, which is this huge conference, as you can imagine. The VP is supposed to speak there, and she's sick. And my boss comes to me and says, yeah, there's this speaking gig tomorrow. We need to sort of send someone to talk about interactive television. And that was something that I was involved with in terms of, we were sort of one of the first networks to solicit photos and videos and emails from viewers. This is like when the internet was just really getting going.
Yeah.
So it was a topic I knew about, and I'd sold a lot to my employees. I'd had so many people sort of sit down and me saying, okay, here's sort of our plan for interactivity, and talk about what we'd done and what we were going to do and why that was important. So at least I knew the topic. And he basically asked me if I could do, like a 20 to 30 minute talk and answer questions for the rest of the hour at this huge association gig the next day. So no prepared speech or anything.
Oh.
And looking back at it, I realized he was probably shaking in his boots, because if I said no, he would have had to do it. So he was hoping I would say yes, and I did. It's just like, oh yeah, sure, I can do that. And this is where it gets weird, because if I was asked to do something like that now, being a professional speaker, it's not like I would get nervous, but it would be like a big thing, right? I mean, I'm addressing like this really big conference.
What you don't know, right?
Yeah. And, I'm just dealing with so much here, trying to keep this television station on, and it's a national TV station, so I'm feeling pretty good about myself, right? About what I can do. So it's like, yeah, whatever, a few hundred people in a room, fine. So I showed up the next day, and it's totally different from what I do now. I showed up the next day literally about 5 minutes before I had to go on. So I didn't even really get a chance to talk to the organizer. I just went in the room that they gave me. I went up, I grabbed the mic, the audio guy turned it on, And I just started speaking. And it was just so weird that way, looking back on it, how cavalier I was going into this room. And there were hundreds of people in this room. And I start doing this talk on interactive TV just because that's what my boss has told me to talk about. And it's funny because, again, I've done the sales talk with my employees. So I basically just repeat the sort of conversations that I've had with other people. And it actually went over pretty well. And I was confident and I didn't stammer. And then they asked me questions and I knew the answers to the questions. And then, the hour was up and I handed the mic in and I ran back to work. And everybody's like, where are you going? It's like, well, this isn't my gig. I've got other stuff to do. I've got cameras to book, et cetera, et cetera. It was weird. It just wasn't really on my radar. And it's funny looking back on it. I really don't know. I don't think I bombed, but I'm not even sure if I was great. I think I presented myself well, but the key is I really don't know what the audience wanted. I didn't even really know the topic. I was just going by, a sentence that my boss gave me that he just sort of kind of, threw towards me that I assumed was gospel. And looking back at it now, it's like, yeah, I don't know. They might have really been confused. They might have been expecting something totally different. So, like I said, it was a very strange way to start off. And I realize now that if I get nerves about a gig or an event, it's not the event that gives me nerves, it's my perception of it. Because I wasn't nervous at all going into this huge room because it's like, well, I'm not a professional speaker. I'm doing this last minute. I'm talking about something that I know. So it was weird. I was not nervous at all then, but I'd probably be a bit more nervous now. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's probably now that you're consciously doing it, I think just bringing it consciously makes you more nervous, perhaps, because now you have expectations and now you know better and now you're more worried and now you're trying to do this and trying to do that. Whereas before, it's like it was on the fly, you just did it. And what I like about this story is that even though you weren't super prepared, what got you through it is that you were so super clear on your messaging. And while I certainly don't want to encourage people to not get speaker training, because I think it's very important, even if you never got on a stage, the fact that you understood on a very deep level what you wanted to say got you through that gig. And obviously, we would love everybody to really go the step further of knowing how to not only have a great message, but know how to shape it through story, which is something you're brilliant at doing, and and knowing how to lead people to whatever action you want them to take. But I do think that the first part of this is you got to get really clear on what you want to say, and be clear and concise and to the point, and talk about it in a very deep and profound way, and not the general stuff. And I think that's what saved you, Jason. Yeah, it's really interesting. People are like, "Oh, I went through my talk a couple of times and I forgot a bunch of stuff and I was still nervous." And I always say to my speakers, and maybe you say the same thing, Jason, that you got to do it and get it in your body until it's like it's walking. If it's like walking, then those nerves are going to be gone. You'll have those nerves, and once you get into it, you're in the flow and you're good to go. People don't realize that you would never go and become a ballet dancer and learn the Blue Danube without actually doing the choreography over and over and over, and working out all the little nuances and the shift of gravity and where you're holding your weight when he lifts you up if you're the ballerina. And you work out all those transitions and all those pieces, and you don't just have one rehearsal, you have 6 weeks. Not that you would need as much preparation as a classical ballet piece, but it's still, well, I don't know about that. But but the thing is we don't realize, we figure I'm just getting up and talking. I wrote down my points. I'm going to be fine. It's like, no, you won't. You need to go through it and get it in your body.
Absolutely, because it isn't
gotta
just
rehearse it. You're an athlete.
It isn't just and it isn't just the words you're saying. It's how you say them. People can tell whether this is something that you've thought out, whether this is something you've internalized, or it's something that you're just trying to remember that you may have typed up the day before.
Right. And, even pros like us, yesterday was a classic example. So, it's really interesting because, Jason, that I have a bunch of new contracts I've just signed, and it's all really exciting, but I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm so busy right now. And yesterday I had a speaking engagement. It was only 20 minutes, and I was so busy with everything else, and it was similar to other topics I've done. I'm like, I'll be fine. And you know what? I got through it, and when I got to the end, I had no close. And I don't mean in terms of sales close, but I had no final story, no final song. I had no final inspiration, no nothing planned. And I stood there going, you're an idiot. You should know better. And I don't mean that in an insulting way. I know that I'm brilliant, but I make mistakes. And, even as a professional, I made that mistake that I didn't really, even though it was only 20 minutes, it could have been way cleaner, even though the feedback was 10 out of 10s. And thankfully we're both at that level where even if we're not 100% prepared, we can still pull it off and be a 10 out of 10. But to me, I strive for excellence. I'm sure that you do too. And, it's important whether you're starting out or you're a seasoned pro like us to be on it. So I totally forgive myself for this, but I've learned my lesson from yesterday.
Openings and closings are the most important thing. And there's times where I figure I can ad lib a little bit of the middle, but knowing my opening and closing for me anyways is like super important.
Yeah, absolutely.
And, you mentioned, you're mentioning gigs, you're mentioning speaking events, you're mentioning getting booked, and this leads perfectly into our listener question today. And
Awesome.
Before I give that to you, I want everybody to know that Cindy and I are here to tackle any of your burning questions about speaking, selling, or influence. And you can email us with your questions at feedback@speakingforprofitpodcast.com. That's feedback@speakingforprofitpodcast.com. Okay, so here's the question. And Cindy, I know you're going to love this one because this is something that you've, done a lot of work on. And this question comes from Marlene in Chicago, and she says, I'm a professional keynote speaker. I find lately I've been sending out tons of speaking proposals, but I hear nothing back. How do I get the attention of planners and organizers?
I love this question. So I'm going to answer it in a second, but Jason, I didn't realize how much of a problem this was until I hosted my conference just over a year ago, the one that you spoke at. I only chose a few speakers, like just not even a handful, like just a handful. And I had 50 applications. It was really interesting. I nearly had a coronary, really, except for you and maybe two others. They were all terribly written. I was so frustrated reading through these proposals. I was like, none of these people are getting paid to speak. I can tell they're not getting paid to speak. There's no way anyone would. And they might have great content and great presence and have a great message, but there's no way. And let me tell you some of the mistakes I've seen and give you a really killer thing to get started with. The biggest thing, and we've talked about this before, is that it was all about me. I mean, I had people writing me novels about what they had overcome in their life. And I'm like, this is a business conference. This isn't an inspirational self-help conference. So you didn't position it properly. And I'm proud of you that you overcame that. But every single human on this planet has overcome extraordinary things. Why is this special? And how does it relate to my audience? So a lot of it was just endless people pitching themselves, or the opposite, where they're not telling me their story, but they're giving me a laundry list of all their credentials. Again, your credentials are lovely, but what are you going to do for my audience? Or the ones that were positioned weren't positioned deep enough. They were like, oh, well, I can help them with this. And I'm like, but that doesn't say anything. You're giving me a generic thing that everybody talks about and needs to be super specific. And these were the things that really frustrated me. Oh my gosh. I got kind of snappy with a couple of people, and like, and I have a rule about not responding when I'm feeling edgy. And I did, because I was so frustrated because I had 50 of these to go through, and by day's end I was like, ah! So those are some of the do nots. Do not tell me your whole bloody story unless you tell me, you do it A, succinctly within 2 to 3 lines, and you tell me how it relates to my audience and how it's going to change your life. And B, don't just give me generic watered down things like, I'm going to help your audience to declutter. Well, that doesn't tell me anything. But if you tell me that you're going to help my audience to organize their leads so that they can follow up and make more money and be able to close more sales, now that's juicy.
Sign me up for that one.
Right. I don't care about decluttering. Are you kidding me? I already have enough things on my plate. Now you want me to declutter, but organize my leads so I can follow up and make more money? Dang, I'm in. So you got to speak to so that's the first tip, is you got to do your research. Actually, that's really the first tip, is please do your research. I couldn't believe how many people did not even do their research and had no idea what they were pitching. Could not believe the stuff that came in. Somebody was pitching about vitamins, and I'm like, you're kidding me.
And they're actually taking the time to do this. That's the thing that kills me is it's their time that they're putting into this. That's something that's totally inappropriate.
Right. And here's the thing is that I would rather, instead of you, the vomiting 50 applications, I'd rather that you spend the time, research and take your top 10 and really target it, which comes to my last point is that people are not picking a vertical, and a vertical is a thin slice of the industry. And I really encourage my speakers that you've got to pick a thin slice. And yes, I know that you're brilliant. We all are. You could probably do a lot of different industries. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't, but if you're not getting the amount of bookings that you want to be getting, then you've got to pick one vertical and bang at it and get yourself known. It's like, here's a classic example, and this just fell into my lap. When I had moved to New York, I met this great videographer, and he referred me to Susan Combs, who's this amazing woman. She's brilliant. She owns a huge insurance agency. Anyways, so she's this brilliant woman, and we started working together. And because of her, I've never worked in the financial and insurance industries, but because of her, it's now become one of my very, very strong verticals. And it's interesting because now I'm starting to get like one big corporation after the other and one big thing after the other. Just recently closed a 3-talk deal with Investment News. But, and that's huge. It's a huge publication, but it's a vertical of mine. So let's say that I was feeling like I needed to generate more leads. Now, while I've worked with a lot of doctors, I've done a lot of wellness, I've done a lot of education, right now, what's hot for me is insurance and financial services. So you know where I'm going to focus my energy if I only have 3 hours to work on it here and there. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to really research all these different places and really be able to target it, because it's much better to put 10 great pitches out that is right to the problem solution and right to what that industry is looking for than it is to kind of go out there and just vomit everywhere with something generic, and then you're just like everybody else. And you're not. Everybody listening is not just like everybody else. You're all fantastic. You just got to step it up.
And I hate what some people say when they say it's a numbers game.
No, it's not.
It's not. It's a quality game. Just sending out 100 proposals that are the same and most of them are inappropriate is just not going to get you where you want to go. But like you said, being targeted, knowing exactly who you're going to be speaking to and how you can help them makes a huge difference. And I know that there's like so much more insight that you can give to people, and we can't fit it all in the podcast. So where can people go if they want more information on getting lucrative bookings?
Yeah. So, Jason, on our website, there is a tab called My Lucrative Bookings Program. And there's also a link in the blog that can get you there. And the Lucrative Bookings Program, I personally think it's one of the best in the market. By the end of the program, you actually walk away with a 90-day plan. And if you're willing to commit 3 hours a week, you will be booked solid by the end of the 3 months of doing this program. Like, that's it. And I literally give you email templates, phone templates, a speaking contract that I paid my lawyer $1,000 for. It's awesome. You just got to fill in the blanks and implement it and literally plop it into your 90-day plan and just, spend 3 hours a week, and you'll be booked solid and doing what you love and making an impact and making money, which is awesome.
Making money's the big thing, and yay! And having something that's going to help you make that easier is definitely a huge advantage.
You can go find it on our website.
SpeakingForProfitPodcast.com.
And I think we're done for the day, aren't we, Jason?
I think we're done, and it's been a bit of a revealing show. I don't talk about my first time with just anyone,
I know. I feel so honored. What does your girlfriend think about that?
I don't know. We'll have to. I'm not even sure if she's going to be listening to this episode or not. So we'll see.
That's so funny. That's great. Well, thank you for all your revelations. It's been great to get to know you better, actually, even though I know you already. I'm getting to know you even better.
That's one of the great things about what we're doing is we're able to share with everybody else, but we're able to share with ourselves too.
Yeah.
And I think that sums up this episode. So goodbye from me, Jason Reed.
And Cindy Ashton.
We'll see you next time.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Find the Speaking for Profit podcast on iTunes and subscribe to our feed to get the latest episodes. While you're there, please leave a rating or a review for the show. We would love to hear from you.